communicate based on this book. Stanislav is a journalist and a writer. He investigates human rights violations in the occupied territories. Among the various prizes he was awarded the Freedom of Opinion Prize awarded by Reporters Without Borders in 2020. And he also served in the Ukrainian army. So I think that maybe in terms of background to our discussion, and maybe let me start with asking both of you, one after the other, maybe Sibyl, you first. If our discussion is about the fight for truth, but also the other side of the coin is disinformation. Can you give an example of something you feel very strongly about, where you have seen where active disinformation is created, travels, and actually is effective? And the next question after that will be how one can also counter that. But maybe you can both give an example that where we can really see how active attempts at disinformation have an effect.
Hi all. First of all, thank you that you today attend this meeting. For us, it's very important. And actually, I would love to start from that. For me personally, I have like three visions of our war. First of all, of course, this is war for our existence as a country, as a democratic state. Now, of course, this is war between two systems, democracy and autocracy. And for me personally, as a journalist, as a professional journalist, also one of the angles of this war, the war between truth and lies. And actually, we see how Russian propaganda started this war in not even in 2014 with the occupation of Crimea, earlier. And for me personally, as for Crimean Tatar who grew up in Crimea, I know what I'm telling about. And I started my journalism career when I was 13 years old in Crimea, and I remember how first I noticed that something strange and something different between how actually Ukraine covered some important events and how Russian channels covered. It was when the conflict on Tuzla split took place in Kerch in 2002, and I noticed as a young journalist, as a 13 years old girl, that there's kind of a difference. So we started in early 2000, how Russia poisoned an information field in Crimea with propaganda narrative that Crimea is legacy of Russian Empire, that Crimea has a strong connections with Russia. And I remember how actually it was also on my school, at my school when I studied as a student. So. And later in 2014 it played significant role on the occupation of Crimea because Russia spread fake narratives about Nazis, about that they liberate Crimea from Nazis, and this is Russian legacy. And unfortunately, I have to say that the part of Western audience and the part of Western elite also believed in that. I remember my conversation with Margaret Macmillan, who is a historian, and she said that in 2014 everyone took for granted what happened with Crimea because even in professional sphere, everyone believed that Crimea is a part of Russian legacy. So, unfortunately, we have to say that. And then I remember how we faced with, in the first days of war, in 2014, with the occupation of Crimea, how actually it worked. And we experienced now that informational agenda, informational warfare of Russia already for 11 years. So we are more experienced. And I can say the same about the Western world, unfortunately. Only in 2022, Western countries decided to cut off, for example, Russia Today. But still, unfortunately, in a lot of countries, the influence and the informational influence of Russia is still very big and huge. And it took 8 years before Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022 with full-scale invasion. how Russia dehumanized Ukrainians, how Russia drew Ukrainians in all information space, and it played its role. And then we believe in Ukraine, and we believe in the Western world that actually truth prevailed, but I'm not sure about that. Even after the investigation that were published on Bucha, on Irpin, on other cities where Russia committed war crimes, we still see attempts to destroy these truths, to destroy that opinions that actually that all these things took place. And I think that now we are in a very strange point of this war, where even unfortunately our allies would spread this and blame Ukraine on what happened. And for me, it's a very dangerous situation. And I think that we have to do everything possible to protect the truth and protect also the question of Russian impunity. Because I know that already this is a part of negotiation process, that Russia again wants to escape from any accusations against committing war crimes in Ukraine. And the work of journalists is very important there.
Absolutely. We'll come back to some of those points in a moment, but Stanislav, maybe also the question to you, I mean, to give some examples of what do you feel, I mean, I think it's not hard to guess what you might say, but could you tell us a bit about which basically lies or disinformation you try to counter most based on probably your personal experience?
Okay, hello to everyone. I will speak in Ukrainian if you don't mind, because my English is not so good. So, у мене є дуже конкретний приклад дезінформації, пов'язаний з місцем, в якому я знаходився, яке зветься ізоляція.
So thanks for being Ukrainian. So I have a very concrete example that is linked to the place where Corvée was, and that is also talk about in isolation.
Ще до повномасштабного вторгнення саме на території заводу ізоляційних матеріалів, який зараз виконує роль такого собі концентраційного табору, був знятий фейковий ролик, знятий представниками цих сепаратистських утворень про нібито українських нацистів.
Back then, even before the full-scale invasion, the place where the current concentration camp was, they created a fake video of so-called Ukrainian Nazis.
Місцеві бандформування взяли форму, взяли шеврони української армії і зняли дуже провокативний ролик про, з таким явно націоналістичним складом думок, так би мовити, тих, хто виконував роль акторів. Але з огляду на місце, де вони знімали, воно було ідентифіковано саме в Донецьку за тими стільцями, на яких сиділи ці люди.
These were local bands that wore Ukrainian uniforms and tried to act in this video, and under despite different conditions, but this place was actually identified. It was near Donetsk.
Ідентифіковано, власне, колишніми власниками цієї території, бо до 2014 року це була платформа культурних ініціатив «Ізоляція». І коли ці люди, власники, які переїхали з Донецька, побачили цей ролик, вони впізнали це місце, вони впізнали навіть інтер'єр, тобто в тому числі ті стільці. І цей фейк, він був розвінчений, і ви можете навіть зараз його знайти на сайті, якщо я не помиляюсь, самої ізоляції.
And actually, the property owners recognized the venue and the place because it's inner interior and the furniture, so you can even find the respective video on the isolation website.
Але в цілому я маю сказати, що, звісно, коли навіть я потрапив до полону, я відчув на собі дію цієї дезінформації, тому що люди, які мене катували і допитували, вони щиро вірили і були переконані, що всі такі, як я, нацисти, навіть ті, які є місцевими, знову ж таки, як я, так, бо я теж з Донецька.
And I felt the impact of this information as well back then when I was imprisoned. Because the people that were torturing me, they truly believed that people like me were Nazis, even the locals like me, because, well, I come from Donetsk, Donbass.
Це, власне, визначало в тому числі ставлення до тебе в полоні, тому що до місцевих вони ставились значно жорсткіше, і як до цивільних місцевих, і як до військовополонених, які виявлялись з Макіївки, з Донецька чи інших міст Донбасу. Таким людям приходилось значно важче, ніж, скажімо, тим, які з інших регіонів країни.
You can also felt it by the treatment of the prisoners, because they were treated more cruel way than others. So the locals, especially Donetsk, were in way more difficult conditions than prisoners from other Ukrainian regions.
Maybe I can follow up immediately with a question. I mean, it is a truly haunting account. Who is the main audience? Now it exists in German. You've also written about this in English. I'm not sure if it's exactly the same text or a version of it. Is this account primarily for international audiences to basically finally get the story right? Or how did you think in terms of audiences you need to reach with this book, with this account?
І маю сказати, що, по-перше, книжка перекладена на сьогоднішній день вже 11 мовами, включно з німецькою і англійською, і, безперечно, це засіб і розвінчення російської пропаганди, і дієвої контрпропаганди в культурному сенсі.
First of all, I have to say that this book has already been translated into 11 languages, among them German and English, and it can be seen as a means against propaganda, kind of dismantling it or kind of contra-propaganda.
Аудиторія цієї книжки – це абсолютно будь-яка людина в тій країні, мовою якою ця книжка вийшла, тому особливо, якщо це європейські мови, тому що, власне, те, про що там йдеться, це загроза не тільки для України і для її населення, але в цілому для всієї Європи.
And so he also maybe...
And the target audience is like any person that speaks the respective language in which the book was translated, and it's especially important to Europe as well, because the existing danger does not only concern Ukraine, but the whole of Europe as well.
Thank you. Sofia, also to you the question, did you have particular audiences in mind when you collected the interviews with Mustafa Djemilev and then published it, and now it's also already in I think several languages, but maybe also for linking the question to Ukrainischer Pravda, which is for many outside of Ukraine a very important source of information. So maybe you can say something there too about audiences. Have they changed? Have they become even more international since 2014 or 2022? I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, maybe I will start with the book. So this book was published first in Ukrainian language in 2017, so 3 years after the occupation of Crimea, and we wanted to bring Crimean context in Ukrainian field, because unfortunately still a lot of people, they don't have an idea about Crimean history. And actually when Elon Musk mentioned in his tweet that Crimea have to be the part of Russia how it was before 1991, actually this book brought the context that about the Crimean history and Crimean Canada, the part of Crimean Tatar legacy on this peninsula. And I think that we didn't actually publish this book for this reason, but it actually helped to understand better this history of Crimea, the history of fight of Crimean Tatars on their land, the deportation, and not only the deportation in 1944, because the deportation of Crimea Tatars started earlier in 19th century, in 18th century, after the first annexation of Crimea by Russia that took place in 1776 after the signing of Kuchuk-Nazhe peaceful agreement. That's about the book, and it helped to understand better the context of Crimean Tatar history in the peninsula, and that Mustafa Djemilev, who was born 6 months before the deportation, dedicated his life for this fight on 1944, then before the return of Crimean Tatars, and then after the occupation of Crimea in 2014. About Ukrainska Pravda and about, so it's for different audience. First of all, for Ukrainian audience, but also for the Western audience, because I see the interest, the growing interest for the topic of Crimea after 2022, actually, and I'm happy about that. About Ukrainska Pravda and the audience, how it's changed, I will say that in the first days of war, in the first months of war, the audience of Ukrainska Pravda was rating 7 million unique visitors for the maybe first weeks of invasion. Now it's less. We launched our English version voluntarily after the beginning of full-scale invasion, and now we have around 2 million unique visitors per month, and around 12 million visits during the month, which is huge audience for us. And I know that for a lot of international journalists, foreign reporters, it's still a very respectful source of information about internal processes and the front line and what is going on. So, and also the part of course, our dedication on fight against Russian propaganda narratives, and yeah, so I will.
Thank you. Also, a question to both of you. I mean, I was wondering, looking at both your books, whether the personal experience, here it's the personal experience of Mustafa Cemilev, but also you, the new generation of Crimean Tatars living through some of the things he lived through as well, and of course also your experience in Donetsk. Do you think personal experiences are a particularly powerful way of countering disinformation? At the same time, I wonder also, are they can they target it in a broad sense, or what is their particular effectiveness? I sense it could be particularly effective because everything you do, just in terms of basic fact checking of information, always seems almost a little helpless. No, you put one information or one truth against a lie, but this approaches the topic sort of from the side and may be much more effective as a result.
Безперечно, особистий досвід значно більш потужніший, як на мене, ніж, скажімо, просто політичне декларування певних речей на якихось загальних формальних зустрічах.
Yes, definitely. I think that personal experience is a more stronger means than some political events where you talk about these things.
Але що цікаво, коли я був звільнений з полону, мені здавалося, що я є, власне, живим свідченням того, що там відбувалось. Але все не так просто, насправді, тому що коли я почав розповідати про ці речі на Заході, я дійсно стикався з російською пропагандою в тому сенсі, що навіть звичайне місцеве населення різних країн запитувало мене, а чи є взагалі якісь свідчення того, що ця, наприклад, в'язниця існує, бо досі Росія її не визнає офіційно як існуючу.
And after I was freed, well, it wasn't easy to share my experiences and also as a witness, because even some locals asked questions like whether this prison actually existed, because officially Russia didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to accept that this prison indeed exists.
На той час у нас, звісно, ніяких ще свідчень, таких документальних, я би сказав, у сенсі відео, наприклад, матеріалів не було. Але зрештою за ці 5 років після мого звільнення вони з'явилися і у вигляді відеозаписів зсередини ізоляції, і, власне, вже, як я нещодавно казав, заарештований очільник цієї в'язниці в Києві, він отримав 15-річний вирок. Тому тепер ми маємо, так би мовити, фізичні свідчення того, про що йдеться у цій книжці.
Back then there were no proof, no video proof, but now 5 years afterwards we have a lot of proof, also videos, and also the chief of this prison was arrested in Kiev, so now we can for sure say that, well, we can prove the existence of this prison.
Of course, Mustafa Cemilev is the main character of this book, but this book is not about him. Of course, it's about him, but this is also about the history of Crimean Tatars, and of course, we shared also our own experience of occupation. I mean, me and Ali Maliyev, who is the because of this book. So we shared that. We shared our thoughts about what we experienced and what we went through, and Crimean Tatars went through in occupied territories. And answering your question, I also want to bring one important context. I remember how in the first months of war, I received an invitation to share my testimonies on Parliament of Canada, and one of the members of this Parliament asked me a question. It was 2 or 3 months after the operation of Bucha in Ukraine, and he said, do you have any thoughts on why I should trust you that Bucha wasn't staged, for example? I was really shocked and surprised because you remember that thousands of photos of tortured Ukrainians were shared in international media. And then I shared my own experience because in Irpin, for example, my colleague, classmate from Harvard, Brenton Moore, who is a documentary filmmaker from the US, was killed by a Russian sniper. And in Bucha, the father of our colleague, Evgeny Kizilov, his name is Valery Kizilov, he was killed by a Russian soldier in his own garden, in his own house. After the liberation of Bucha, after Ukrainian forces came, we tried actually for more than 1 month to find his body, and then we found his body in a morgue of Kiev region after 1 month of search. So I shared this experience because this is something that happened with me personally. So and as a witness, as a person who went through this grief, and of course this member of parliament then asked to forgive him, but still after again and again, after so many testimonies, after thousands of photos that were published by international media, you are still able to receive such weird question from the international audience, and particularly the members of parliament of Canada, who is actually one of our allies. So still, Russian propaganda is huge. Russian propaganda works very good unfortunately, in global south countries. And I also see a lot of danger after the cutoff of Radio Liberty and Voice of America in some vulnerable countries in our region, and I think that it also will help Russian propaganda to improve their spread and to improve the influence. Unfortunately, we have to say that now we are the more dangerous time of spreading Russian narratives coming.